Adaeze had learnt early that mirrors were not her friends. In their small village of Umuna, beauty was currency, and she had been born bankrupt. The other children made sure she never forgot it. "Adaeze monkey face," they would chant as she walked past, their laughter echoing through the dusty paths between mud huts. During group games under the ancient Iroko tree, she would hover at the edges, waiting for an invitation that never came. The girls would whisper and giggle, their hands cupped over mouths that stretched into cruel smiles whenever she dared approach. Even the boys, who normally didn't care about such things, would wrinkle their noses and make exaggerated sounds of disgust if their mother suggested they play with that unfortunate Adaeze. Her mother, Mama Adaeze, would stroke her daughter's hair at night and whisper, "Inner beauty is what matters, my child." But those words felt hollow when you spent your days eating lunch alone under the shade of plantain trees. By the time Adaeze reached womanhood, the isolation had become a familiar companion, like an old wrapper one thing from too many washings. Every morning, she watched from her small hut as groups of young women moved together like flocks of bright birds, their calabashes balanced perfectly on their heads as they headed to the stream. Their laughter would drift back to her on the wind, full of shared secrets and plans for the evening. She would wait until they were out of sight before making her own journey, her feet knowing every rock and root on the lonely path. The village square during market days was torture. She would see the eligible young men circling the pretty girls like bees around honeypots, their eyes bright with interest, their voices low with flirtation. Chinwe, with her smooth skin like fresh palm oil, always had 3 men vying for her attention. Ngozi's gap-toothed smile could make any man stammer. Even Ifeoma, who couldn't cook to save her life, had suitors lined up at her father's compound. But Adaeze, she might as well have been invisible. Then came the evening that changed everything. Adaeze was grinding pepper outside her hut, her mortar and pestle making their familiar rhythm, when a shadow fell across her workspace. She looked up, squinting against the setting sun, and nearly dropped her pestle. Standing there, real as the red earth beneath her feet, was Chukudi, the young farmer whose yam mounds were the talk of 3 villages, whose shoulders were broad enough to carry 2 baskets of cassava, whose smile had made more than one maiden's wrapper slip a little. Every unmarried girl in Omuna had tried to catch his eye, leaving fool at his farm gate, accidentally appearing wherever he went to sell his produce, and here he was, at her hut. "Good evening," he said, his voice warm like palm wine fresh from the tree. "I am Chukudi. May I sit with you?" Adaeze's mouth went dry. She looked around, certain this was some elaborate prank, expecting to hear the explosion of mocking laughter at any moment. But his eyes were sincere, patient, waiting for her answer. Her hand trembled as she gestured to the wooden stool beside her door. "Please," she managed to whisper, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. Before we continue, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what part of the world you are watching from. I'd like to know how far the stories go. The news spread through Umuna faster than Harmattan wind through dry grass. Chukudi, the most eligible bachelor in 3 villages, was seen at the ugly girl's hut. Women abandoned their evening cooking to gather in small groups, their voices rising in disbelief. "I saw it with my own 2 eyes, Mama Ngozi swore, slapping her thigh for emphasis. He sat there for 2 full hours, talking to her like she was Adesua, the beauty queen herself. The theories began immediately. Old Mama Ekweme, who claimed to know these things, declared that Adaeze must have gone to a powerful juju man in the next village. What else could it be, she asked, her wrinkled face set in certainty. A man like that doesn't just decide to cut a woman like that. There must be medicine involved. The men were equally baffled and merciless in their mockery. At the palm wine bar, Chukwudi's friends surrounded him like a council of elders judging a criminal. "Chukudi, my brother, have you hit your head on a yam mound?" asked Obina, genuinely concerned. There are beautiful women throwing themselves at you and you choose that one? But Chukudi kept coming back, evening after evening, like the sun rising in the east without fail. He would sit on that same wooden stool, watching Adaeze work, asking about her day, telling her stories about his farm. At first, she barely spoke, certain that at any moment he would laugh and reveal the joke. But he never did. Instead, he noticed things no one else ever had. How her hands moved with graceful efficiency when she pounded yam, how her eyes lit up when she talked about the small garden behind her hut, how her rare laugh sounded like water over stones. You see the world differently, he told her one evening, as fireflies began their nightly dance. When you talk about the plants in your garden, it's like they're your friends. I've never heard anyone speak that way. Adaeze felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope. 3 months later, when Chukudi asked her to marry him, Adaeze laughed, not from joy, though there was that, but from sheer disbelief at the absurdity of her life. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until she had to sit down on the ground, until Chukudi knelt beside her with concern replacing his smile. "I'm sorry," she gasped, wiping her eyes. "It's just, do you know what my life has been? Do you know that I've spent 23 years being told I'm too ugly to look at? And now you of all people want to marry me?" He took her hands in his farmer's palms rough and warm. "Adaeze, I don't know what people see when they look at you, but I know what I see. I see a woman who tends her garden like it's sacred ground. I see someone who never became bitter despite how this village treated her. I see the person I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life." She searched his face for deception, for pity, for anything that would make sense of this, but all she found was sincerity. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, I will marry you." That night, the gossip in Omona reached a fever pitch. The impossible had happened. The ugly girl was getting married to the handsome farmer, and nobody could believe it was real. The day of the wedding arrived like a spectacle nobody wanted to miss, though not for the reasons Adaeze had once dreamed about as a little girl. The village square was fuller than it had been for Chief Okonko's funeral, but the guests hadn't come to celebrate. They'd come to witness what they considered the eighth wonder of the world. "I have to see this with my own eyes," Mama Ngozi had declared, adjusting her best wrapper. "Otherwise, when my grandchildren ask me about the day the ugly girl married the handsome farmer, they will say I'm making up stories." The women clustered together like market hens, their eyes sharp and judgmental, scanning every detail of the modest ceremony. There was no live band, no elaborate tent, no coolers overflowing with soft drinks and beer. Just a few benches, a local pastor who looked mildly confused about the whole situation, and decorations that Adaeze had made herself from palm fronds and wildflowers. "Yeah," someone whispered loudly enough for half the gathering to hear. "See how simple everything is. Even the juju couldn't get her a proper wedding." But Adaeze barely heard them. She was too busy staring at Chukwudi, who stood in the front in his best white shirt, looking at her like she was draped in gold instead of her simple lace wrapper. When it was time for Adaeze to walk forward, the whispers rose like a swarm of bees. She wore a modest blue wrapper and blouse that her mother had saved for years to buy, her hair braided simply, no makeup to hide behind, not that it would have helped according to village opinion. "Chai, look at her," someone stage whispered. "Even the rapper cannot perform miracle." A few barely suppressed giggles rippled through the crowd. But then something unexpected happened. As Adaeze passed by, Chukwudi's face broke into the widest smile anyone had ever seen, his eyes actually glistening with tears. He stepped forward, unable to wait for her to reach him, and met her halfway. "You are beautiful," he said, loudly, clearly for everyone to hear, taking her hand. The whisper stopped abruptly, replaced by shocked silence. He led her to the front, his hand never leaving hers, looking at her with such obvious adoration that several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Love, real, unmistakable love, was hard to witness when you'd come expecting a joke. The ceremony itself was short, but filled with moments that confused the scandal-hungry crowd. When it was time for Adaeze to walk forward, Chukwudi didn't give a short, embarrassed answer. Instead, he turned to face the gathering and spoke with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "This woman has a heart that shame all of us," he declared. "While you people were busy measuring beauty by face alone, I measured it by character. While you were looking for a pretty flower to pluck and display, I was looking for strong roots to build a life with. I am the lucky one here, not her." You could have heard an ant sneeze in the silence that followed. Mama Ngozi's mouth hung open like a compound gate. Even the children stopped fidgeting. When it was time to seal the marriage with a kiss, Chukwudi cupped Adaeze's face with such tenderness that 3 women actually wiped tears from their eyes, though they would deny it later. As the new couple walked back down the aisle together, Adaeze caught sight of Chinwe, the village beauty, watching with an expression that looked suspiciously like envy. For the first time in her life, Adaeze understood that maybe, just maybe, she had won something that no amount of smooth skin or bright eyes could buy. She had found someone who truly saw her. The change began so subtly that at first, Chukudi thought he was imagining it. 3 weeks after bringing Adaeze home as his wife, he walked out to inspect his yam mounds and stopped dead in his tracks. The leaves were greener than he'd ever seen them, practically glowing with health in the early morning light. His cassava plants, which had been struggling in the dry season like everyone else's, stood tall and vigorous, their stems thick and strong. He muttered to himself, kneeling to examine the soil. It was the same earth as his neighbors, the same drought conditions, the same merciless sun beating down, yet his crops looked like they were being watered by invisible hands every night. He touched a yam leaf reverently, half expecting it to disappear like a dream. When Obina came by later that afternoon to borrow a hoe, he stood at the edge of Chukudi's farm with his mouth hanging open. "Chukudi, what kind of fertilizer are you using? My crops are dying. Emeka's cassava has turned brown, but yours looks like it's planted in the Garden of Eden." Chukudi just shrugged, trying to hide his own amazement. "I don't know, my brother. Maybe it's just luck." But it wasn't just luck, and it wasn't just the crops. Everything Chukudi touched seemed to prosper. The 3 chickens Adaeze had brought from her mother's compound began laying double eggs, 2 yolks in almost every shell. His old goat, which hadn't produced kids in 2 years, suddenly birthed healthy twins. Even the fish in the small pond at the edge of his property multiplied so rapidly that he had to expand it. While other farmers watched their livelihoods shrivel under the drought that had gripped Emonna for 3 months, Chukudi's farm became an oasis of abundance. He would wake before dawn and find Adaeze already up, humming softly as she moved around their small compound, and he would watch her with a sense of wonder that grew with each passing day. "You are my blessing," he told her one evening, pulling her into his arms as the sun set in brilliant orange streaks. "Since you came into my life, everything has flourished. Not just the farm, me, my heart, everything." Adaeze would laugh, that beautiful sound he'd worked so hard to coax out of her, and shake her head. "It's just coincidence, Chukudi. You're a good farmer." But he knew better. The village noticed, of course. In Omonna, nothing stayed secret for long, especially not inexplicable prosperity. The gossip shifted from mockery to something darker, more suspicious. "It's not natural," old Mama Equemen declared at the market, her voice carrying across the stalls. "Everybody's crops are failing, but his are flourishing, and it started exactly when he married that girl. This is juju, I tell you, dark medicine." Others nodded in agreement, their eyes narrowed with jealousy disguised as concern. "They must be doing witchcraft," Mama Ngozi added, lowering her voice to a whisper that somehow reached every ear. "How else do you explain it? He married the ugliest girl in the village and suddenly he's the richest farmer? Something is not adding up." The men were equally suspicious, but more direct in their mockery. At the palm wine bar, they would nudge each other when Chukudi arrived. "Ah, here comes our local magician," someone would mutter, just loud enough for him to hear. "Tell us, Chukudi, what did your wife put in your food to make your farm grow? Or is it something you people do at midnight?" But they never said these things to his face with real conviction. There was too much fear mixed with their envy. And Chukudi, he didn't care what they thought. Every evening he came home to Adaeze, held her close, and thanked his chief for leading her to her. "Let them talk," he would say, kissing her forehead. "They talked when I married you, they'll talk when we prosper. Their words cannot stop our blessings."
Adaeze woke up to cold sheets and an empty compound. The space beside her where Chukudi usually slept was smooth, untouched, as if he'd been gone for hours. She sat up slowly, her heart beginning a nervous rhythm in her chest. "Chukudi?" she called out, her voice sounding small in the morning stillness. No answer. She wrapped her wrapper around herself and stepped outside, squinting against the bright sunlight already beating down on the compound. His farming tools were still leaning against the wall where he'd left them the night before. The goats were bleating, hungry and unattended. Even the chickens seemed agitated, pecking at the ground with unusual urgency. This wasn't right. Chukudi never left without telling her, never left his animals unfed, never disappeared like smoke in the wind. She checked the farm, the path to the stream, even walked to the village square asking if anyone had seen him. The responses she got made her stomach turn to water. So he finally came to his senses and ran away. Mama Ngozi cackled, slapping her knee with delight that was almost obscene. "I knew it. I told everyone this thing could not last. A man like that with a woman like you. It was only a matter of time." The other women joined in, their laughter sharp as broken bottles. Chingwe, who had once been pursued by Chukudi before he chose Adaeze, smiled with satisfaction. "My dear, face the truth," she said with false sympathy dripping from every word. "He used you for whatever juju you were doing for his farm, and now that he's rich enough, he's gone to find a proper wife, a beautiful one." Adaeze felt each word like a slap, but she shook her head stubbornly. "No, you people don't know him. Our love is real. Something must have happened to him." This only made them laugh harder. "Love?" Obina, who had stopped to listen, snorted with derision. "Sister, love is for people who have something to offer. What were you offering, except whatever medicine you used on his crops? He took what he needed and left. That's the truth you need to accept." She stumbled back to her compound, their laughter following her like a curse. For 3 days, Adaeze barely ate, barely slept. She kept expecting Chukudi to walk through the compound gate with some explanation that he'd gone to the city for supplies, that he'd fallen ill at a friend's house, that anything except abandonment was the truth. She refused to believe what the village kept telling her, even as doubt began to creep in like floodwater under a door. At night, she would lie in their bed, breathing in his scent still clinging to the sheets, remembering how he'd looked at her just 4 nights ago. "You are my blessing," he said, his eyes so sincere she could have drowned in them. Had it all been a lie? Had she been starved for love that she believed a performance? On the 4th morning, she woke with swollen eyes and a heart that felt like it had been hollowed out. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe she had been a fool to think someone like Chukudi could truly love someone like her. Maybe beautiful people were only meant to be with beautiful people, and she'd been living in a fantasy. She was sitting outside her hut staring at nothing when she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't even look up, certain it was another villager coming to gloat. "Adaeze," a man-well voice said softly. She raised her head slowly and found herself looking at Okonko, the fisherman, a man known throughout Umuna for his catches and his wandering eye. He was handsome in a rough way, his skin darkened by long days on the river, his arms muscular from hauling nets. "I've been watching you," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her skin prickle with warning. Okonko sat down uninvited on the stool outside Adaeze's hut, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her want to wrap herself in more layers despite the heat. "I know you're hurting," he said, his voice oily with false sympathy. "And I know what these wicked people are saying about you. But I want you to know something. I've always noticed you, even before Chukudi." Adaeze's eyebrows rose in disbelief. This was the same man who had once made loud, retching sounds when his friends dared him to greet her at the market. The same Okonko who had called her that thing when describing her to others. But grief and loneliness were making her weak, making her want to believe anything that sounded kind. "You don't have to lie to me," she said quietly, but without much conviction. "I'm not lying," he insisted, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. "The truth is, my manhood, it only wants you. Only you can make it rise. I've tried with other women, even the beautiful ones, but nothing. Only when I think of you." He trailed off, looking away as if embarrassed by his confession. It was such an outrageous lie that under normal circumstances, Adaeze would have laughed him out of her compound. Okonko was legendary for his conquests. Half the unmarried women in 2 villages could testify to his very functional manhood. But these weren't normal circumstances. She was drowning in abandonment, suffocating under the weight of "I told you so" from every direction, desperate to feel anything other than the crushing certainty that she was fundamentally unlovable. "You need comfort," Okonko continued, moving closer. "You need to feel the warmth of another person, to know that you're still desirable, still a woman. Let me show you that Chukudi was a fool to leave you." His hand reached for hers, and she didn't pull away. Some distant part of her mind was screaming warnings, but a louder part, the part that had been alone for so long, that had tasted love for just a few months only to have it snatched away. That part was crying out for anyone to make her feel less empty. "Just one night," he whispered. "Let me prove to you that you're worth wanting." And God forgive her, she nodded. That night, Adaeze made a choice she knew was wrong even as she made it. Okonko stayed until morning, and when he left, he kissed her forehead with what seemed like genuine tenderness. "Thank you," he said simply, and she almost believed he meant it. She spent the day in a haze of guilt and confusion, scrubbing her skin at the stream as if she could wash away the betrayal of Chukudi, even though he had abandoned her first, hadn't he? That evening, Okonko burst through her compound gate like a madman, his eyes wild with excitement. "Adaeze, Adaeze," he shouted, startling the chickens into a flurry of feathers and noise. "You won't believe what happened today. I went to the river like always, threw my net like always, but what I pulled up, chai! Fish everywhere. Big ones, small ones, more fish than I've caught in 6 months combined. I filled 3 baskets, 3! He was laughing now, spinning in circles like a child. "I knew it. I knew you would make me rich, just like you made Chukudi rich." He grabbed her hands, his excitement palpable and infectious. "This is just the beginning, Adaeze. With you by my side, I'll be the biggest fisherman on this river." For a moment, just a moment, Adaeze felt something warm bloom in her chest. The feeling of being valued, of being seen as a blessing rather than a curse. But then Okonko's words truly registered. Just like Chukudi became rich. Not just like Chukudi became rich. Not coincidence or luck. He believed she had some kind of power, some kind of magic that could transfer wealth. And he wanted it. The warmth in her chest turned to ice. The next morning, Okonko was gone. His side of the sleeping mat was cold, and when Adaeze rushed outside, his fishing basket, his extra clothes, everything he'd brought all vanished like morning mist. She stood in her compound, the sun barely risen, understanding flooding through her with sickening clarity. He had gotten what he wanted, the blessing, the catch, the proof that she was his ticket to wealth. And just like Chukudi, or so she thought, he had taken it and run. She should have felt devastated, but instead she felt numb, hollow, like a calabash with the bottom knocked out. "So this is my worth," she whispered to the indifferent chickens pecking at her feet. "I'm not a wife, I'm not a companion, I'm a good luck charm to be used and discarded." The laugh that escaped her throat sounded unhinged even to her own ears. She had spent her whole life being told she was worthless, and now, ironically, she'd discovered she had value, just not the kind any woman would want. By mid-morning, her compound had visitors. Not 1 man, not 2, but 5, then 7, then 10, crowding her small space like cattle at a watering hole during drought.
News of Okonko's miraculous catch had spread faster than wildfire in Hamatan, and with it, the theory that was now accepted as fact. Adaeze had some kind of power that made men prosper. "Please, just one night," begged Emeka, a farmer whose crops had failed 3 seasons running. He was on his knees, literally on his knees, his pride abandoned at her doorstep. "My children are hungry. My wife looks at me with disappointment every day. Just let me be with you once, and I can turn everything around." Behind him, Arinze the trader nodded eagerly. "My business is dying, but I know if you just spend one night with me, everything will change. My manhood, it only responds to you." The same lie Chukudi had told, now repeated like a script they'd all memorized. She should have sent them away. She should have screamed at them, cursed them, reminded them that these were the same men who mocked her husband for choosing her, who called her ugly to her face, who treated her like something stuck to the bottom of their shoes. But something broken inside Adaeze made a different choice. "You want me?" she heard herself say, her voice strange and distant. "All of you want me? The ugly girl that nobody would look at? Now suddenly I'm desirable?" The men nodded eagerly, shameless in their desperation and greed. Yes, we want you," Emeka cried out. "We've always noticed you, always thought you were special." More lies, but lies she was now immune to. And yet, there was something intoxicating about being wanted, even if it was for the wrong reasons. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't the girl everyone avoided. She was desired, no, needed. Men were fighting for her attention, camping outside her hut, bringing her gifts of yams and palm wine and cloth. It was perverted, it was wrong, but it filled a hole that had been carved into her soul since childhood. "Fine," she said finally, and watched their faces light up like she'd promised them heaven. "But one at a time, and you leave in the morning, all of you." They agreed so quickly, so eagerly, already arguing among themselves about who would be first. As Adaeze watched them, these men who once looked through her like she was air, she felt something shift inside her. Power. Dark, twisted, but undeniable power. If this was all she was good for, if this was the only way the world would value her, then so be it. She would take what she could from this cruel joke of her life. One by one they came. One by one they left at dawn, rushing off to their farms, their businesses, their fishing nets. And one by one they returned with stories of unprecedented success, which only brought more men to her door. Her compound became a pilgrimage site for desperate men, a place where the downtrodden came to purchase luck with their bodies. Adaeze moved through it all like a ghost, barely present, barely feeling anything except a dull sense of vindication. "See," she wanted to shout at the village women who whispered behind their hands. "See how much your husbands and brothers want the ugly girl now." But the victory tasted like ashes in her mouth. It was a morning like any other morning in what had become Adaeze's strange new existence. Her compound already filling with men before the sun had properly risen, their voices blending into a desperate chorus of promises and pleas. She sat on her stool, barely seeing them anymore, their faces blurring into one mass of greed and need. Somewhere in the middle of the 3rd week of this circus, she had stopped bothering to learn their names. What did it matter? They all wanted the same thing, said the same lies, left the same way. She was mechanically pointing at someone. Maybe it was Udoka, the palm wine tapper. Maybe it wasn't, when the crowd suddenly parted like the Red Sea. And there, standing at the entrance to her compound, dusty from travel and thinner than she remembered, was Chukudi. The world stopped. The noise stopped. Even her heartbeat seemed to stop. He looked terrible, his clothes worn and stained, his face gaunt, a healing cut above his left eye. But his eyes, those eyes that had once looked at her like she hung the moon, were now wide with horror and confusion as they took in the scene before him. His wife, surrounded by a compound full of men who scattered like cockroaches when light hit them. "Adaeze," he whispered, and the sound of her name in his voice, that beloved voice she thought she'd never hear again, broke something in her that had been barely holding together. She ran to him, not caring how it looked, not caring about anything except that he was real, he was here, he had come back. She crashed into him with enough force to make him stumble, and then she was sobbing into his chest, her fists pounding weakly against him, torn between joy and rage. "Where were you?" she screamed through her tears. "Where did you go? They said you left me, they said you used me, and I thought—" Her words dissolved into incoherent crying, years of pain and weeks of degradation pouring out of her like a dam finally breaking. Chukwudi's arms came around her, tight and desperate, and he was crying too, his tears falling into her hair. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "Adaeze, my blessing, I'm so sorry. Let me explain, please, let me explain everything." They sat in her hut, their hut once, and Chukudi told her everything, his voice shaking with anger and shame. Okonko the fisherman, the man Adaeze had trusted in her lowest moment, had done more than just use her and leave. He had drugged Chukwudi's palm wine that last night, waited until he was unconscious, then sold him to labor contractors heading to the eastern ports. "They made me work on a cargo ship," Chukudi said, his hands trembling as he spoke. "For weeks, I was basically a slave, moving goods from dawn until I collapsed at night. No pay, no freedom, no way to send word. Every night I thought of you, wondered if you thought I'd abandoned you." His voice broke. "I escaped 2 weeks ago, jumped ship when we docked, and I've been working ever since. Working odd jobs just to eat, sleeping in bushes, anything to get back to you." He looked at her with such anguish that Adaeze felt her heart crack wider. "You used you," he said fiercely. "That bastard Okonko used you, and then they all used you. My poor blessing, what did this wicked village do to you?" He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "But I'm back now. I'm back and I'm never leaving you again. Never. We're going to start over, properly this time. And anyone who wants to mock us, use us or hurt us will have to go through me first." For the first time in weeks, Adaeze felt something other than emptiness. She felt hope. The village, of course, had a field day with the drama. The story of Chukwudi's return, Okonko's treachery, and Adaeze's exploitation spread like wildfire, and opinions were divided. Some felt vindicated. "See, I told you something was wrong." Others felt cheated of their entertainment. And a few, just a very few, felt ashamed of how they treated the couple. Okonko himself had disappeared, his sudden wealth taking him to a different village where no one knew his sins. But Chukudi and Adaeze didn't care about the gossip anymore. They packed up everything they owned, sold the farm for a good price, it was still miraculously fertile, and moved to a new village 3 days' journey away. A place where nobody knew the ugly girl or the handsome farmer, where they could just be Chukudi and Adaeze, two people who had found each other against all odds. And there, in their new home, Chukudi kept his promise. Every morning he woke up and told her she was his blessing. Every evening he came home and proved it with his actions. The crops still flourished wherever Chukudi planted them, and people in their new village wondered at his skill but never questioned it. As for whether Adaeze truly had some kind of power or whether it was all just coincidence and Chukwudi's genuine farming talent combined with his devotion, well, that's a question the storytellers still debate. But Adaeze knew the truth that mattered. She had survived being unwanted, then being wanted for the wrong reasons, and had finally found someone who wanted her exactly how she was. And that, she thought, as she watched Chukudi working in their new farm while humming the song she had taught him, was the only magic that ever really mattered.